Всем привет and welcome back to Minsk in Belarus. It is freezing. It's probably close to -10, so I'm not gonna make this intro very long. In today's video, we're gonna be going to how expensive or cheap is it here in Minsk in Belarus relative to the other cities and countries around it here in Eastern Europe. I've done these kind of videos, especially in Ukraine before and other cities in Belarus. So let's get into the video before I freeze to death here. So I usually stay in furnished apartments when I'm traveling in Eastern Europe. So it's very rare that I'm gonna stay in a hotel and a hostel. And that's why you'll see in my videos about prices, or I'm showing you the price of an apartment. You need to check out though, if you're coming to Belarus, my video about registering and all the hassle. I'm gonna link it up here in a card, also down below in the description, because here there are a lot of complications if you actually stay in an apartment, like on the Airbnb, for example, that you don't have in other countries in the region. And it actually is it's definitely better to stay in a hotel, everything equal in terms of price. But I'm actually here in an apartment, and the prices, I would say in Minsk, an Airbnb apartment, one bedroom, furnished, in a central location will cost you somewhere between 30 and 40 euros a night. That is definitely a lot cheaper, obviously, than traveling in Western Europe, like big cities like Paris. It's probably better than half the price. It's probably getting on close to, 40%, 35% of the price that you'd expect to pay in those big cities. And actually compared to the capital of Ukraine, Kiev, it's pretty much around the same price. Not a big difference there, but like I see like Odessa in the winter time when it's off season, it's a hell of a lot cheaper than here for accommodations. It's gonna be about half the price of being in Minsk off season. Now the seasons here seem to be a little bit different. Minsk is not a big summer destination. A lot of people leave the city. There's not as much business going on. So actually accommodation was about the same price when I was here in June as it is now. So you don't have a big seasonal fluctuation in that sense. So it seems to be pretty consistent. In fact, in June, I paid a little bit more before the high season, and one of my friends, he came here to Minsk in August, and it was basically the same price as now what he was telling me he was paying, maybe even a little bit cheaper, which seems strange. But as I said, it doesn't get that many tourists. So for accommodation, definitely it's very good value. It's basically on a par with what you expect in the region. So transport, that's going to be vital, especially when you come in at the airport. And we all know about the taxi mafia. Never ever take a taxi from someone who just propositions you, solicits you right there at the airport. It's never good. It's never going to be in your favor. So it should cost somewhere between 30 to 40 Belarusian rubles to go from the airport to anywhere in the city center in Minsk by taxi. There are taxis there that you can prepay in the airport in Minsk. Also, you can just get on the Yandex Taxi app, and then you will be able to go into the center for a reasonable price. So in the city itself, if you're driving through the city of Minsk, you're probably going to pay somewhere between 3 and, let's say, 5 Belarusian rubles maximum. Depending, of course, if there's any surcharges, during peak times, that of course goes up if you're taking the taxi app. It will tell you that before you embark on your journey. So that again is very, very competitive. Now, other things that you can do for transport, of course, you can take the metro, and the metro is always a fun thing to do in Eastern Europe. And there are one or two nice stations in Minsk. It's not like Moscow, it's not that extent of beautiful stations, but you can take that in. It is super cheap. There you're going to pay like 30 euro cents, well, more or less 32 US cents to take a trip on the metro anywhere in the network. And if you compare that to, say, the tube in London, that is tiny, because the tube in London you can end up spending a few pounds depending where you're traveling to. So that's one of the things to do for a little bit of fun in Minsk. Not necessarily that you shouldn't take a taxi, but taking the metro is always a good way to see also how most people are traveling. And as I said, there are some nice stations to check out, so go do that. Oh, trains, yes, trains, that's what I want to tell you about. So if you want to travel then, say, to another city within Belarus, you can do that. And again, I think I went to Gomel on a pretty nice train. It took about 3 hours, and that cost me
think 14 Belarusian rubles. Again, compared to Western Europe, that's pretty cheap. That's at least half the price, if not a third of the price of doing that in Western Europe. So you see, definitely a very good value for your transport is Minsk.
So food in restaurants in Belarus. Here I have a traditional dish. Hopefully you can see that. That's very similar to the famous draniki. It's called duni. So these actually have meat in them. So that's something you're going to see quite often here in Belarus. They also have some food that's similar with the countries around it, like pelmeni, vareniki, borscht, of course, which is the classic Ukrainian soup. So you have pretty similar kind of fare in terms of traditional food here in Belarus. Now in terms of price, I would say the restaurants, to give you a good indication, are probably going to set you back for a meal somewhere between 35 and 50 rubles. I would say in terms of restaurants that Belarus, definitely Minsk, is about maybe 30 to 50% more expensive than, say, Kiev or Odessa. So there is definitely a big difference that I see in terms of price between those two countries. So Ukraine is probably about 33% cheaper, I would say, still in terms of restaurants in the big cities. But if you were to compare that with anywhere in Western Europe, it's still about half price to eat in a restaurant in Belarus, in Minsk, the capital. So that gives you a good ballpark figure. It's probably half the price of Western Europe, and definitely if London or Paris, something like that's probably less than half. It's probably closer to a third. Overall, it's still amazing value if you are comparing that with traveling in Western Europe or even Central Europe. It's definitely noticeably cheaper here in Minsk. So one of my favorite passions, obsessions is of course drinking coffee and flat white, and in this city it's going to cost you about 4 or 5 Belarusian rubles for a flat white is what I normally drink. And it's very tasty. So that's going to be about €1.80, so about $2 US more or less, maybe a little bit more expensive, and that is half the price of getting the same beverage in, say, Paris or London, at least having been there. I remember in Amsterdam I paid €4 the last time when I was there. So there you see, for this, still pretty good value, 50% cheaper. For those of you who are coffee addicts, it's gonna be good here. So, nightlife in a magical Minsk. What is it like? How expensive is it? Now, I would divide it up into two categories. You're going to have bars, clubs, restaurants that are mainly marketed towards more wealthier Belarusians. And then you have clubs that basically market themselves exclusively to foreign visitors. And the price points for both of them are dramatically different. Now, let me give you an example. If we were to go to my favorite club where I love the music and the cocktails are great, and it's marketed towards Belarusians, a cocktail is probably going to set you back about 10 Belarusian rubles, which is pretty good value, I think, even within the region. But if you were to go to the clubs that are marketed towards foreigners, you're going to see those advertisements for them in the airport, even written in English. It's going to be double the price, at least. For example, getting a long drink at the bar at these places is probably around 30 Belarusian rubles. And that's definitely not cheap if we're looking at even compared to Western Europe. In a capital city in a mid-sized country, maybe like Dublin, it's probably going to be actually a little bit cheaper in Dublin. You could also go to more smaller bars or clubs in the city center that are not marketed towards really either of those two demographics. It's going to have a lot more students, maybe some more budget travelers. It's kind of a mishmash of different people. I do actually really like one of the bars there. It has my favorite green sorrel shots. I always call them the Irish shots there. And it's probably going to be comparable in terms of getting, say, a cocktail or long drink, probably about 10 Belarusian rubles there. My green shots probably cost about, I think it's 2 rubles, Belarusian rubles for each one. So there you see, it is more reasonably priced, but not super cheap. I would say that's probably, if we compare it to Western Europe, going to be maybe about half the price at the low end. And then when you go to these more expensive clubs that are marketed towards foreigners, it's going to be maybe a little bit cheaper. Now, if you go for bottle service, you take a table at a club, minimum spend in those clubs marketed towards foreigners is going to be about somewhere between
$450 US, maybe $600 US minimum spend. So as you see, overall, it's kind of two different types of nightlife. We can even say three. And if you were to go for the premium level Belarusian, it's going to be very good value, I think. I think you're going to get great value for your money. It's going to probably work out about half the prices if you were in Western Europe or North America, the premium club in a top city. But if you go to the clubs that market for foreigners, you are going to have to pay more money. That doesn't necessarily mean that, depending on your preference, that it might be a good option anyways. You may still get great value by going to those clubs. Just depends what you're into. But if you're more into, say, the music scene, having cool music, and maybe some more intellectual girls, then probably you want to go with the place where the Belarusian elite are going, rather than the clubs that market towards foreigners, which has a different mixture and I would say overall less intellectual vibe to it. So that is Minsk, Belarus, and how relatively expensive or cheap it is for nightlife. So that is an overview of how expensive or cheap it is here in Belarus. Now I put cheap into the title of this video, but the Zara experience is not about being cheap, it's about having value for money and an incredible, unforgettable experience here in the east of Europe. So I have one question for you, and that is, what are you doing next weekend? Because it could be you, it could be here in Minsk. Magical Minsk is a bit cold. It is end of November here. I'm going to be leaving today actually and going back to Ukraine. You can also join me in a city like Kiev. But what do you have to do in order to be considered to live the Zara experience yourself? And that is, you need to go below into the description to this video and click on a link to apply. There's an application form there. Now, also because this video is about how cheap Belarus is, and you saw it wasn't exactly cheap in every sense of the word, depends on where you're coming from. It is a premium experience, the Zara experience. I only want clients who are willing to invest the time and money in becoming their best selves, basically, and coming here with the right mentality. I've already gone through in other videos. If you were, if you're interested in a sex tourist, for example, or you just want to bang lots of chicks and really interested in quality, then it's not going to be for you. There are other people who can help you in your endeavors to do that, but I'm not going to be one of them. Also, equally, if you are, 60, 70 years of age and you think that you can come to a country like Belarus or Ukraine or Russia, and there's going to be this bevy of hot 20-year-old Instagram models waiting for you on the tarmac, then that's not the dream, the fantasy that I'm selling. There are other more, realistic boutique matchmaking sites, marriage agencies who can help you. I actually did a few collaboration videos with them. I'm going to link that below. But it's not worth your while applying to live the Zara experience, because we're going to go out, we're going to meet people in real life, and you have to, be willing to put in the effort, the time, and the money in order to succeed. I've had great success this year with my clients, both here in Minsk, St. Petersburg, Odessa, and Kiev. It was fantastic. I really saw the results and how much I could help them. And some of them are even getting married. Can you believe it? I don't run a matchmaking service, but I probably have a higher percentage of my clients end up probably finding someone for a long-term relationship, even though they come here to really just experience what it's like in Eastern Europe. And of course, there's always opportunities to meet beautiful women, and that's part of the Zara experience. So it is really chilly and snowing, as you can see behind me, in the center of Minsk. So I'm going to pack up my gear and head to the airport. I'll see you in the very next video. It's going to be from Ukraine. Do svidaniya. See you in the very next video.
Zara experience.